بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 21 of Surah Al-Baqarah, يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the meaning, O mankind, worship your Lord who created you and those before you so that you may gain taqwa, so that you may gain an awareness, a consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the previous ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about the different types of people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about the mu'minun, then the kafirun, then the munafiqun. And in verse number 20, Allah Azza wa Jal stopped talking about the munafiqun. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is changing the message or the topic of that what is being spoken about. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing mankind. Now usually you find in the Madani surahs, and this is a Madani surah, of course, Surah Al-Baqarah is a Madani surah. Most of the time you will find with Madani surahs, Allah Azza wa Jal addresses the believers, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. However, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions here, Ya ayyuhan nas. And this is the first address that you find in the Quran to every human being. So this is a reminder to us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or for us to ponder over, the first message to mankind that when they are addressed all together is what? Is the reason that they were created. U'budu rabbakum. Worship your Lord. So this is the first command that you find in the Quran. The first command is mankind's obligation to worship their Lord. Bear in mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say, U'budullah. This is mentioned in other places in the Quran. However, here it mentions U'budu rabbakum. Worship your Lord. And whenever you find the word Rabb, who is the Lord, that there is a number of messages or understandings that we take from this. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you. Huwa rabbukum khaliqukum, that He created you. And that He subhanahu wa ta'ala is raziqukum. And that He is your sustainer. وَهُوَ مُدَبِّرُ الْأَمْرِ, and that He is the one who is in control of all of the affairs fil kawn, in the universe. And fourthly, هُوَ مَالِكُ الْمُلْكِ, that He is the owner of all of the dominion, of all of the creation. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is reminding mankind, O mankind, worship your Lord who is your creator, your sustainer, the owner of the universe. So there is a link between affirming and understanding Allah Azza wa Jalla's rububiyyah, His lordship, to worshipping Him. That they go hand in hand and that they cannot be separated. This is an important point. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, U'budu, worship rabbakum. U'budu, what it means is that to submit, to lower yourself to your Lord. Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course? الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ, the one who created you. The one who created you, brought you into existence from nothing. وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, and those who came before you. So you are not unique within yourselves, i.e. that there was no one like you. Rather that Allah Azza wa Jalla is reminding you that He subhanahu wa ta'ala created you, and He created all of the people and the nations that came before you. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their Lord, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala created them as well. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And then the verse is completed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying to us that in the hope that you will attain taqwa. لَعَلَّكُمْ. So, pondering over the ayah, taking the whole message, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, O mankind, worship your Lord who created you and those who came before you, so that you can attain taqwa, God consciousness. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says to us concerning fasting, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyamu. O who have believed, fasting has been prescribed upon you. Kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum. As it was prescribed, obligated upon those before you. Similarly here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He created you as He created those before you. At the end of both verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you can attain piety. So you can attain piety by physically worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, specifically with fasting, so that you gain taqwa. And more generally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, worship your Lord who created you and created those before you so that you can gain taqwa. So you gain taqwa, God consciousness, by worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the formula. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that you can gain taqwa. So for example, a person says, well, I want to be from the muttaqeen. I desire to be from the muttaqeen whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises in many places in the Quran. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only accept from the muttaqeen. I want to be from them. Therefore, what do I have to do? U'budu rabbakum. Therefore, worship your Lord. And it isn't just merely a command, i.e. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, U'budu rabbakum, worship your Lord, and nothing else said. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that He is the one who created us. So because He subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us, we in turn then have to worship Him. Because this is what we were created for. To worship Him alone subhanahu wa ta'ala. As is mentioned in Surah Al-Dhariyat. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I did not create ins or jinn kind or ins, mankind, except that they worship me, that they single me out, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in worship. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next verse, bearing in mind this is the first command you find in the Quran, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of the blessings that He has placed upon us. الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فِرَاشًا. That He is the one who made the earth as something flat for us, a resting place for you. وَالسَّمَاءَ بِنَاءً. And that He subhanahu wa ta'ala made the sky like a canopy. وَأَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً. And that He sent down from the skies a rain for you. فَأَخْرَجَ بِهِ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ رِزْقًا لَكُمْ. So that you can then bring forthwith fruits from the earth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the previous verse reminds us, commands us, worship your Lord who created you. Worship your Lord who created you. Yeah, and as we say again, when we mention Rabb, it means that Allah is the one who created you. Allah is the one who sustains you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who owns everything and is in control of everything. In this verse, Allah Azza wa Jal goes into more detail, reminding us that He is the one who flattened the earth, made the earth a place for resting place, something beneficial for us. Now when you look at the earth, you find that the earth is different types of terrain. There are types of terrain which are uninhabitable. It's very difficult to live on. The whole of the earth is not like that. There are places, the majority of the earth, if you like, is inhabitable, that you can live on it, and you can rest on it, and you can exist on it. This is from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that He made the sky as a canopy over you, to protect you. And that He subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down rain so that you benefit from this rain, so that you can then grow fruits and provisions. All these meanings here go back to us reminding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, worship your Lord. And remember, when we say Lord, Allah is your creator, which He subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded us of. And that He subhanahu wa ta'ala is your sustainer, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is reminding us here. That He sustains us by sending us down rain, protecting us with the sky from the outer things in the universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting us. At the end, فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ. So therefore, and this is the first command you find, or first prohibition rather. This is the first prohibition you find in the Quran. To avoid shirk. That do not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. So do not set up rivals, partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in worship, while you know that. There is a hadith which is in both Bukhari and Muslim, and is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. He said, I said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, which evil deed is the worst with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, أَن تَجْعَلِ اللَّهِ نِدًّا وَهُوَ خَلَقَكَ. To make an equal with Allah while He alone created you. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا, which is a prohibition. تَجْعَلُوا, do not make. تَجْعَلُوا, جَعَلَ means to make something. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the beginning of this ayah, الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمْ, that He made for you the earth. Allah Azza wa Jal created the earth and made and formed the earth like that for us. I formed the earth like this in a way that it wasn't like before. جَعَلَ. Likewise here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not make. I do not make things that weren't previously in this way, weren't created for that purpose. Do not make them into something which will be equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So do not bring from idols, do not make your desires, any forms of worship, anything that you have or any whatever it is, do not make it equal or on par with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the singular of that is the word nid, which means like an equal or a partner, something that is equal to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not make any equals. Do not make any forms of equals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, and that you know, and that you are fully aware of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And if you think about it, the ending of this ayah comes when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained things very, very deeply and in detail to you. That He created you, that He sustains you, that He is your Lord, and that you should gain taqwa by knowing this, that He made the earth a dwelling place for you, and He made the sky as a protection for you, and that He sent down the rain so that you can bring fruits from the ground. After all of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, after you know this, do not make any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not just simply worship your Lord and don't associate any partners. This is the kalimatu la ilaha illallah, of course. And this is another way how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained the kalima to us. La ilaha illallah is based upon ithbat, affirming, and nafi, to negate. La ilaha, here there is negation. There is no deity, of course, worthy of worship. Illallah, there's the affirmation, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirms the tawheed by saying, U'budu rabbakum, in verse 21. Worship your Lord. And here's the negation at the end of 22. فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا, to negate any equals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This goes beyond, and goes without saying, the fact you're not going to make an equal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you will not make anything above Allah azza wa jal. A'yadhum billah. You're not going to even put something on par or equal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let alone take something above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah azza wa jal protect us from that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very emphatic and very clear to us and explaining to us in different ways, La ilaha illallah, with affirmation and with negation. It's very important that we understand that. And that when we read just these two ayat, you find the kalima of a tawheed in there, but further explained. We're going to stop here, inshaAllah ta'ala, and we'll continue in our next lesson. جزاكم الله خيرا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.